These dark fantasy memes are trending big time, and as a lover of medieval fantasy knights, I started to draw knights in armor in the dark fantasy art style, and these dark fantasy knights actually turned out pretty cool and were really fun to draw. If you're a lover of knights or dark fantasy, trust me, you're going to have fun too. So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to draw these dark fantasy knights before this trend comes to an end. I'll teach every little tip on what I learned about drawing knights in armor, from how the armor is placed on top of the figure's body to a step-by-step process on how to draw a knight in armor. And for the dark fantasy fans, I'll go through some tips on how to draw the knight in the dark fantasy art style. Let's go. To draw a knight, we need to first understand the mechanics of armor. The armor of a knight is not made up of one piece, but is constructed of many armor pieces. These armor pieces are placed above clothing and are secured through belts and bolts. So in places where there isn't armor, you would be seeing clothing under the armor. Sometimes you can see clothing on top of armor, mostly on the neck, looking like a cape or scarf, or on the waist. These were for protecting the armor from rain or sunlight, and for identification of which side the knight was on. This also gives contrast of texture with the armor, giving a more balanced look. The texture of cloth or leather would look good together with a hard and heavy armor texture. To completely understand how to draw the armor, we need to learn how the armor pieces generally connect together through belts and bolts. However, when we draw the knight in armor, we are not going to draw each armor piece by piece, but first draw the armor in its simplest shape, resembling the anatomic body parts, with a light sketch. The shape of armor resembles human anatomy because it goes on top of the human body, but it doesn't go into too much anatomic detail, and the size is thicker because armor isn't skin tight. Draw the armor resembling the parts of the body in armor chunks. These armor chunks, for example the armor for the shoulders or the armor for the head, would have a resembling shape of that particular body part, the shoulders or the head. Just simpler in shape and bigger in size. So start off by drawing a figure in armor in simple shapes. Draw a sphere for the armor for the head, torso, shoulders, pelvis, elbows, and knees. Draw the arms and legs in cylinders or light lines, and roughly draw the hands and feet in simple shapes. These chunks of armor will vary in size depending on the armor thickness, so always be aware of the proportions and correct them in the early sketching stage. Once you finish your light sketch of the armor chunks in simple shapes in the right proportions, let's go into detail on how the armor pieces connect together. Let's start with the armor for the head, or so-called helmet. The helmet is made of two pieces of armor. One piece surrounds the entire head, and the other piece covers the front of the face. The piece that surrounds the entire head will be round, the shape of a sphere or bullet. The piece that covers the front of the face will have a point at the nose area, creating a vertical line in the center. Resembling the front part of a real face, it gets slimmer at the jawline. Bolts will be on the sides of the helmet for connecting the two armor pieces. Draw a thin gap or two holes for the knight to see, and some holes at the mouth area for breathing. When drawing holes at the mouth area, draw light lines in a pattern the holes will follow. Then draw the holes in equal distance. The armor for the torso is made up of two pieces, one piece at the front and one on the back. The piece at the front will have a point at the middle of the chest area, creating a vertical line in the center. The piece at the back is barely seen, but is just a simple armor piece that covers the back. Belts will be on the shoulders and sides for connecting the two armor pieces. Attach another armor piece resembling a collar with bolts for the neck area. or half clothing wrapped around the neck, for the neck. The armor for the shoulder is made of several armor pieces. The biggest piece has a round surface of armor that covers the entire shoulder area. The other armor pieces attach to the bottom of this piece and connect to each other, getting smaller in size, ultimately covering the upper arm. Bolts will be on the ends of each armor piece for connecting the several armor pieces. The armor for the arms is divided into armor for the upper arms, elbows, and lower arms. The armor for the upper arm is the armor attached to the shoulder armor, so clothing or chainmail will be seen underneath, in the inside areas of the upper arm. Clothing can be drawn with lines and triangles that indicate folds, and chainmail can be drawn in zigzaggy lines intersecting. The armor for the elbow is a round surface of armor on the outside of the elbow. Belts will be on the inside of the elbow, attaching the armor in place. The armor for the lower arm is made up of 1 or 2 pieces. One piece of a half cylinder protecting the outside of the lower arm, connected with belts, or 2 pieces of half cylinders protecting the entire lower arm, connected with bolts. For the lower arm, you choose. I'll go with protecting the entire lower arm. The armor for the pelvic area is made up of clothing or chainmail. For better mobility in battle, there can be parts of the body without armor, but with clothing or chainmail, like the bending in joint areas, upper arms and legs, and the pelvic area. The armor for the legs is divided into armor for the upper legs, knees, and lower legs. The armor for the upper leg is made of 1 piece, a half cylinder protecting the outside of the upper leg, connected with belts. Clothing or chainmail will be seen underneath in the inside areas of the upper leg. The armor for the knee is a round surface of armor on the outside of the knee. Belts will be on the inside of the knee, attaching the armor in place. The armor for the lower leg is made up of 1 or 2 pieces. One piece of a half cylinder protecting the outside of the lower leg or shin, connected with belts, or 2 pieces of half cylinders protecting the entire lower leg, connected with bolts. The armor for the arms and legs are pretty similar. Basically, the upper arms and legs have armor on the sides only for better mobility, and the lower arms and legs have armor on one side or armor all around. Lastly, the armor for the hands and feet. The armor for the hand is made of 3 armor pieces for each finger and 2 for the thumb, with an armor piece protecting the back of the hand. The armor for the foot is mainly made of 2 armor pieces. The armor piece that wraps around the heel and the armor piece that wrap the instep of the foot and the toes. Bolts will be on the sides of the foot for connecting the 2 armor pieces. Remember that the armor doesn't just float on top of the body, but is made up of armor pieces attached through belts and bolts. Now that we understand how the armor pieces of each armor chunk are generally connected, let's add the final touches. Add buckles to the belts, and push the shapes of the armor pieces. You can make pointy or round edges on the ends of the armor pieces. For creating the texture of armor, draw a line inwards, offsetting the outline of the armor pieces. Blend this line inwards through shading to create the texture of a bump on the ends of the armor pieces to give more depth. For the shading, shade the shadows created by armor pieces overlapped by other connecting armor pieces. Then shade the entire drawing overall by shading the areas that aren't exposed to light, by shading lightly several times. Don't press down hard to shade darker areas, but just shade lightly several times. For the areas that are exposed to light, use your eraser and erase dark areas and pencil marks to create a shining texture of armor. On these lighter areas, add some scratches to the armor damaged from battle with thin light lines. Draw a matching environment for the background, and we are done. Since you've all gave this video a like and subscribe, if you haven't, I'll give you 2 seconds right now to subscribe. Here are 2 tips on drawing a knight in the dark fantasy art style. Tip number 1 is to add lots of dark value. The dark fantasy art style speaks for itself. Dark fantasy has a dark mood, making the dark areas a lot darker. There are lots of dark areas in dark fantasy art, and these areas are so dark, sometimes you can't even see anything. As artists, we can use this to our advantage and draw with less detail, or even not draw at all in those dark areas. The knight in armor has a lot of detail to be drawn, but having these dark areas, we can focus more on the more visible, lighter areas. Contrary to these darker areas, draw the lighter areas in detail. For example, the armor that's facing a bright fire should be drawn in detailed texture with fine lines, while the armor not facing the fire could be pitch black. Draw the light areas with detail and the dark areas a lot darker in less detail. Tip number 2. Sketch with the correct proportions. I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. The first light sketch will determine the quality of the entire artwork. The line quality and shading aren't as important as the proportions of the figure. The dark fantasy art style has a dreamy mood, which means it doesn't show lots of realistic details. Rather, the figure's pose and state of mind is important in the artwork. That is why the figure's proportion in the first sketch is that much more important compared to the final touches. We have come a long way. Drawing these adventurous knights was quite the adventure to me. But this adventure doesn't stop here. I'm going to continue this journey of drawing to get better. Fellow adventurer, join me on this quest, fellow adventurer. Alright, that's enough dark fantasy for today. As always, let's get better together. Take it easy, guys.